Good morning, everyone. We'll get started right about 12 o'clock. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us for this afternoon's Alamo AFCEA webinar. Just a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Charles Bryce to introduce our speakers. As a reminder, all the attendees are on mute throughout the remainder of the webinar to maintain the sound quality of the presentation. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I will read those aloud towards the end of Drew's presentation, and the recording will be added to the Alamo AFCEA website within the next few days. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to VP of Education, Charles Bryce.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Charles Bryce, Vice President of Education for Alamo AFCEA. I want to welcome everyone today. I hope that this training is beneficial to you in your personal and professional development. But before we get started, there are a couple things that I wanted to inform everyone, whether you're a member or a non-member. First is that membership has value. Besides receiving on a monthly basis the Signal magazine, there are other things that you can benefit from being a member of both AFCEA as well as the chapter. First and foremost, you are connected to a network of professionals around the world. There are 140 chapters worldwide. There is a great deal of information that's available to you online that will keep you connected to the community of other professionals through conferences, symposia. And as we find ourselves in this current state of pandemic, most conferences, symposia, meetings, luncheons, breakfasts, etc., around the world are now being carried out through online sessions such as this, so that you have greater access to the community than you may have had previously. Some of those are at cost, some of those are free, some of those are member only, but you can look for those things either through our website, alamoafcea.org, or going to afcea.org and looking at their events page for other information that can help you with your professional development. There are also resources available to you to acquire certifications or continue your education, including degree programs. There's access to recorded sessions such as this type of a webinar that are available through the various portals. There's the ability to ask for subject matter experts to come and deliver training through online sessions or even on site. There are award and scholarship programs for those of you that are continuing your academic pursuits. We are also going to see changes to our Alamo chapter, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And most importantly, as we receive your membership dues, we use that money to give back to the local community. We're helping veterans throughout San Antonio, the San Antonio, greater San Antonio area, as they deal with the pandemic and other issues, PTSD, etc. So please consider membership. I think you'll find that it pays for itself over and over again throughout the year. Along with that, I mentioned that there are changes coming to the Alamo chapter, basically through our online portal. We're going to start seeing benefits to being affiliated with the Alamo chapter. We're going to go live on the 3rd of August with changes that will allow you to set up a profile so that when you go to register for training or luncheons or whatever, your information is already captured. So once you log into the system, you won't have to enter that information over and over again. There's an ability to opt into a membership directory so that you can not only have your information shared with other members, but you'll have access to the information shared by other members for helping you with your connection to the greater community. We will begin to have more access to members only. So for those that are participating today as non-members, you may see some of that access reduced over time, such as right now, if you go to our web portal, you have access to all the previous webinars this year, whether they were monthly luncheons or training sessions such as this. Eventually, you will have access to the abstract and a little bit of the information, but you won't have access to the video recording. You'll have to be a member, and that will go behind the membership login system. So again, I would suggest that those of you that aren't currently members, consider becoming a member. Included with that, we're going to establish a resource for uploading resumes and looking at job postings to where our corporate members and our individual members will be able to exchange that type of information to help you with your professional development and your future careers. Having said all of that, I would like to introduce Drew Church of Splunk. Drew Church is a senior security specialist who's been working with the DoD for decades in various aspects, including security operations manager, vulnerability analyst, system administration, and application development. He's much better at talking about the subject of today. So without further ado, I will pass the screen and the microphone to Mr. Drew Church. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Bryce. Just want to make sure you can hear me.
We can hear you, Drew. Thank you.
Great, and you should be seeing my screen any moment. Can you confirm it's up? Awesome, thank you so much. I want to say thank you to the AFCEA Alamo chapter for having us here today, and thank you to all the attendees. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. Again, my name is Drew Church, and I do work for Splunk. And we're going to be talking about operations and orchestration with a broader topic of automation around security, but just don't think product specific. Think about how automation and orchestration can help you in your roles. I do have to add a caveat that there's a potential maybe during our question and action or answer section that I convey some kind of capability that may be coming into a Splunk product or solution in the future. If I do that and you are in the midst of looking at procuring something from Splunk, make sure that you are doing that based on what is in the product today, not on some forward-looking capability. So again, I don't intend to make any statements like that today, but I may, especially during our Q&A. With that, I do want to get and just briefly introduce our agenda for today. I'm going to introduce myself in a little bit more detail. I'm going to talk about security orchestration and automation, or SOAR. I'm going to explain and deep dive into a couple of examples of SOAR within public sector, and then talk big picture about some lessons learned and best practice recommendations that I, as a security advisor at Splunk, would like to convey to you. A little bit about me. I've been with the company since last August. Before that, as Mr. Bryce mentioned, I spent about 10 years working for the Department of Defense. Had done a number of different things. My last role was as a security operations center manager for one of the Navy's largest commands. Had an opportunity to do some really cool things, like working at United States Fleet Cyber Command as an action officer writing defensive cyber operations orders. Also done a number of different IT and application development roles across that time in DoD and before that in industry. I'm also a Navy reservist. Even though I left federal service and to join Splunk, I couldn't get enough, and so I went back into the Navy. And with that, let's go ahead and kick it over to talking more about the high-level concepts and capabilities that we see in the SOAR marketplace. There's a lot of words on this slide, but I really want to focus on the areas on the left. So when I think of SOAR, and we talk about SOAR, right? Security, orchestration, automation, and response. The top two things that should come to mind are orchestration and automation. So orchestration and automation differ mainly in they're not mainly, they are different. And the differentiation there is really orchestration is where you take things and put them all together. So when you think of like the root word orchestra, think about a conductor who takes the brass section, the string section, the percussion, etc., and then goes ahead and makes it all work together in that to create a beautiful performance. Automation, think of an assembly line, think of what Henry Ford did, and then think about how we've transformed those assembly lines into robotic process automation. Think about how humans don't need to be involved in so many of these processes because we're allowed to let machines do what machines are best at. Also want to talk about how event and alert management play a role into SOAR. I think everyone that works in a security operations center or even in IT operations, be it in a NOC or just in infrastructure management, knows that when outages happen, when security incidents happen, and when alerts or other events come into whatever pipeline and set of tools that you're using, a lot of times our analysts and our operators are having to dig into those alerts, dig into those events to find out what's really going on, right? An email came into the inbox saying that a server can no longer be pinging, or maybe you from your SIM, you got an event saying, or an email or a notification saying, hey, we think there's some suspicious activity over here. That SOAR tool should really integrate well with however you do that. Maybe you have solidified on using an IT service management tool like ServiceNow, or maybe something like Jira in your workflows. Or maybe you are still using email as your primary means of communication, and a SOAR tool should work with both of those. Case management, I think, is another key component of that. When you think about case management, we're thinking that end-to-end life cycle of a security incident, event, or any kind of operational outage going on in your environment. This should be not just, hey, what has our technology found? But it really should be, again, that end-to-end process, because I think, as we all know, there are processes inside of our environments that aren't just inside of technology. Sometimes you have to pick up a phone. Sometimes you have to have a meeting. Sometimes you have to take pictures of and collect things. They're just kind of out of band from your technology stack. And being able to have a platform that can handle that and integrate well with that is going to be critical. I think the world today, we all know that the kind of the buzzword that we like to talk about is collaboration, and that's no different when you're talking about SOAR. As your analysts are deep diving into their security events and incidents, they need to be able to communicate with one another. They need to make sure that, and that communication shouldn't necessarily be happening out of band unless there's some very specific reason, right? So within the tool, within the technology, collaboration is key. So being able to do kind of we call chat ops, if you're familiar with the concept, right? So tagging people in groups and asking and getting attention and eyes on a problem or an investigation from within the platform, so people don't have to bounce from tool to tool. And then for the leaders on our webinar today, I think metrics and reporting are very important. In my prior role as a manager leading a security team, I needed to provide information back up to my ISSM and to my CIO, as well as the commander, about what we were doing inside of our security program. I needed to be able to demonstrate that the value that I had solicited from a man trained and equipped perspective was being leveraged from within the organization, that we're actually doing something. So your SOAR tool needs to be able to help gather those metrics and generate those reports with the minimum of work on your part to get value and get it to what you need to. Scalability is another key thing of anything a SOAR technology needs to do. When you start thinking about how you use technology today, some of you may manage or oversee small networks, and some of you may see very large ones. Some of them are in a single site, single building, single room even, and some of them are spread across the entire globe. And so the technology needs to work where you're working and not just a one size fits all. And so when you are scaling up and out to handle those network diversity as well as the scale, you need to have that same performance. Otherwise, when you're building those metrics and reporting, right, hey, why did we invest all this money, but then the response time was too slow, the tool isn't actually providing it, so our analysts had to go back to a manual process. Scalability is absolutely critical. I think the next two items really go hand in hand: open and extensibility and community power, right? So the tool really needs to be able to grow with you. And I'm going to talk more about that here in a few moments about some in our lessons learned section about how important it is that it can grow with you and it can be extended. And then using both internally developed, vendor provided, and then community powered pieces of content, detections, workflows, things that you can either use out of the box or customize to make the best fit of your time and your environment, right? I think one of the things that people identify when with SOAR tools, like, or not specifically a SOAR tool, but any technology, is when we're running into a situation where the vendor or the technology has not done a good job of providing you with the capability to customize, and you have to end up tailoring your process or your workflow to the technology rather than making the technology work for you. So for those of you kind of introducing those concepts, I want to kind of highlight and focus on where SOAR fits into your security stack. Looking left to right here on this graphic, we have a number of different data sources that provide input into what is traditionally a security incident and event management, or SIEM technology. Combine that SIEM with some kind of a user entity behavior analytics tool, UEBA, UBA. You have all these great sources of data. You have some really great events, but then that's where the humans need to take into play, right? And so instead of throwing a number of bodies at that, that's where the value proposition of SOAR is, I think, so critical. Here inside of SOAR, you take all of these pieces of information that are now gone through your SIEM, have had actual analytics performed. There's been some level of triage, but you do need something to bring it together and to provide that rich context. And that's where automation comes into play. So you build out these robust processes that happen the same way every time. And then there's this beautiful orchestra piece here, right? Where now that you've decided and the automation has gone and gathered some piece of threat intelligence, for example, maybe you want to introduce a block at the firewall. Maybe you want to write or update a signature on your IDS, IPS platform. Maybe you need to block that file from running on your endpoints, or maybe updating your web application filter. Maybe it's increasing or making some modifications to your endpoint detection and response platform and helping to detect or hunt that same problem across all of that. And that's where SOAR provides that. It's really that force multiplier across the entire security stack. SOAR won't typically replace anything in the stack. It's really just an investment in doing things smarter, more effectively, and more reliable. I do want to kind of point and take a look at that same process, but overlay the OODA loop, right? So we've got observe, orient, decide, and act. Going back again, our data platforms, our data lakes, as well as our SIEM, our UBA technologies, either Splunk's or another vendors, right, do a fantastic job of observing and helping to orient and provide those analytics on top of all of that data. But then traditionally, we just stick that into a human-based tier system in our security organizations, where the tier 1, the tier 2, and maybe eventually the tier 3 are taking a look at that event and then going and manipulating a number of different technologies or tools. So the idea with Phantom or another source solution is to get those analysts out of the business of doing and into the business of decision making, right? We absolutely can and do support those analysts shifting some of that decision making when there are very binary or clear sets of criteria, but that's not necessarily where most of our customers we find leverage them. It's again about focusing on that acting side of this OODA loop. I want to introduce some concepts around SOAR technologies and some concepts. Playbooks are going to be a word that you're going to see from Splunk and from other vendors. Playbooks are really that codification of your mission or business process into usually using a visual playbook editor or some kind of a user interface that should look very reminiscent of a flow chart or another kind of design process, right? Where you have a start and a finish block, and then you have steps in between. Briefly, what I want to kind of explain what you're looking at here. In this process, we have a start, we have the end blocks, just like any good, well-formatted process diagram you have. And then in these 3 blocks, we call them actions. These actions are those pieces of technology that the SOAR tool is using to orchestrate. The whole playbook is helping provide that automation engine behind the scenes. So one of the things I think is important about SOAR is the ability to integrate with a number of different products. And you'll see here, and this is a screenshot from Splunk's SOAR offering Phantom. We haven't named a single vendor here. We're just looking at the process of doing this investigation routine. We're running a geolocate IP action, a who is IP action, and we're gathering some reputation about that IP address. But we don't force you to use any one vendor. These technologies should be replaceable, and you should be able to work seamlessly against them. And when you do come up into changes in technology where you do need to migrate from system to system, you shouldn't have to re-engineer your automation system behind the scenes. It's also critical to continue to keep those humans in the loop, as I described a slide ago, right? Where in this particular playbook here, we've got, after these actions are run, we prompt the analyst with some information gathered from these investigative actions. They make a decision, and then on the outcome of that decision, they're gathering all of this. And in this particular playbook, we're sending that data. The great thing about a SOAR platform is it doesn't have to be, it can, and in most cases will be, a case management platform for the security team. But sometimes you need to, in addition to running cases, doing those investigations, and blocking IPs of the firewall or hunting a hash across the security platform, you may want to send that data somewhere, right? Obviously, we're going to send a lot of our data coming out of Phantom into Splunk. But if you have another security platform, another data lake, a big data platform, or some similar technology, right? Getting the output of those investigations back into that and kind of feeding that feedback loop where you're able to then make better analytics and decisions against that is a critical capability of any security orchestration tool. I think it's important to note that something like Phantom, changing and iterating on these playbooks is as simple as disconnecting these blocks or extending them and dragging and dropping some more on there to continue to build that playbook design. Again, I do hope that there's an opportunity for questions. There should be. I've scheduled time at the end. So if there are questions, I hope that we some stuff's resonating with you and you're able to ask some questions. Nothing's off the table. But for now, I do want to, as I mentioned before, highlight a couple of defense-specific use cases. This specific use case for automation and orchestration is really near and dear to my heart. I had an opportunity to work with this customer of ours. Kind of setting the scene here, the use case is for a tactical cyber response team where they run defensive. It's very defensive in nature, but they're supporting mission partners. And the teams are broken out into what we call forward and rear teams. The forward team is doing an investigation or a hunt mission on that partner network, looking for indications of compromise and doing some collection against these systems. Some of the challenges they have, again, like these are tactical teams, so they're coming in and going into it's a rapid response, and they need to get information back to the commander as quick as possible. And frequently they had no knowledge of what the environment looked like before they deployed to the site. These analysts are like absolutely burdened with some repetitive and mundane tasks. They're doing the same process on the same selectors over and over again, using a whole myriad of tools and technologies that don't all have the same form, fit, and function. And due to the operational nature of these, sometimes those tools and technologies weren't necessarily available at all of the different locations where these teams may deploy. Another huge challenge that this team faced was maintaining and creating these internal processes as service members changed throughout these teams. Not only were the mission environments that they were being deployed to changing, but also the team and the technology on the back end. What we did was put Phantom inside of this process where this team that had a forward team right at the mission partner network, and then a team rear at a headquarters command. the process from here was where after the collection was done on the team forward, they would send some requests for information or RFIs back to the team rear. That team rear supported more than one mission at a time and would frequently become overwhelmed because just kind of the dynamics of the environment where there would be, it was very cyclical where you'd have a lot of work and then not a lot of work, a lot of work and then not a lot of work. And so we wanted to help smooth out that curve back in. So that the process was helping them both get the data back to that team rear from the forward team, but also when they were doing the investigation of those selectors. And so we supported, we built out some playbooks for doing IPs, domains, URLs, and file hashes. We're able to gather these amazing evidence bundles and then pass them back to the team forward. The value add of automation in this whole process was really being able to take and scale that. You can see the quote there, right? They essentially doubled their capacity. And we were able to help them in this and do it in about 4 weeks. So not only did we double capacity, but we reduced the time to get things back out the door. Very, very, very compelling use case. And I'd love to explore further with someone if they were interested. The next one I think is really cool. I'm guessing many of you are going to be familiar with a host-based security system. This team at they had multiple classifications on networks, or multiple classified networks, I should say, and partner environments. So as you might imagine, they have a number of different assets, and you can't plug in an unclassified asset into a classified network. And so HBSS, one of the requirements is it detects on rogue assets when something comes online that shouldn't, or helps detect when we have cross-domain violations where you're plugging an unclassified computer into a classified. The process that these analysts were following was very manual in nature, doing a lot of investigation just to find out where the asset was and then go reclaim that asset. Meanwhile, it's still talking on this network. Unclassified on classified is not that big of a deal, but when you think about classified asset being put on an unclassified network, you start getting really concerned. So they wanted to get an automated way to execute these manual steps as soon as that rogue asset alert was fired. Now this playbook has been implemented to based on triggering from that alert, immediately looks up that asset, finds out if it should be there or not. If it's not supposed to be there or there's a problem, it automatically detaches it or quarantines it from the network, right? Shuts off that port on the switch. And then also notifies the cognizant ISSO or ISSM for that network. And it does this and helps meet some of the DoD RMF requirements you have in the SIGs about, hey, when this happens, the ISSM must be notified in, X number of minutes or hours, right? It helps doing that automatically. But then the end result is that this process is executed in minutes versus hours, and the network's more secure, right? So I was really impressed with this one just because of how complicated the process was and how they were able to really streamline it, and how it has been able to be deployed across every single one of their different classified networks and partner environments, to making sure the assets are where they need to be. As I was preparing for this webinar, I went looking through some of the market research out there, and I thought that this recent survey from Enterprise Management Associates had a really compelling figure here. When surveyed, 97% agreed that SOAR technologies increase workload and maintain the same number of staff. I bring this up because one of the things that we've heard from customers as we've been talking to them about SOAR is, especially when we're talking to federal employees and their management teams, or to contracting teams, hey, we're not looking to get rid of people. And sometimes you'll read in the marketing, hey, you'll automate 90% of tier 1 or whatever. There's some efficiencies to be gained there, but we're not about replacing jobs. The idea is to get that overburdened team that is not beating SLAs and SLOs. They're not responding in a timely manner. The idea is to make them able to do that by helping triage, automate, and respond to that flood of alerts, not to replace the people. You allow the people to get back to doing the things that the people are great at versus copying and pasting from tool to tool. I'm going to pause there and take a quick drink, if you'll excuse me. Now I want to talk through probably one of my favorite topics of around automation, about how to do it and what to do and what not to do. So I think when you talk to anyone who's ever automated anything, be it a production line, be it a food service industry thing or something in IT and security, the best case scenario is when that automation is easy to understand, or that process is easy to understand, easy to implement. These things are going to be well documented, and we're going to know step by step exactly what the expected inputs and outputs of every step in the process. It's also beneficial here because you can calculate the return on investment. I've taken a number of process improvement courses over my years. I've been through Lean. So when you do your value stream analysis and you're looking at value added versus non-value added work, right? Being able to identify and look in that process and say, hey, this step added value or this step didn't, and then targeting the things that don't add value or speeding up the things that do add value, right? You can immediately see, and you have the measures and the metrics to prove that this was a wise use of your time or your resources if you do need to purchase something. When they're automating things, people are often going to want to run to the whiteboard. I think that's the best thing that you can do, is to say, hey, even if the people involved are not, automation engineers, they're not people who've been classically trained in flow charting anything out, you don't have to, don't nuke it, if you will. Take the time and just get the subject matter experts into the room and make sure it's a diverse group of people. Don't just take your star performers. Take some of the people that maybe you're like, hey, they do a great job, but they're not, the top 1 or 2%. They probably have a different perspective on this and different things that they struggle with that you could highlight and make better in your automated process. Some questions that you're going to want to ask yourself when you're going through a whiteboard session like this is understanding, again, focusing on those expected inputs and expected outcomes, and then starting to design around any edge cases that may occur, right? Because not everything is as simple as if this, then that. Sometimes there are things when these 5 confluences of events happen, you need to take this one specific step. Phantom or other sort of technologies can help you with that, right? Where you are able to branch off and not follow the same process every time. So being able to highlight and understand where those are is going to be absolutely critical. Talking on more again on these automation strategies and some best practices. After you've started and documented that process, if somebody's already documented it for you, that's fantastic. But if they haven't and you've done that, start actually looking at what you've documented or diagrammed out. Identify where you spend the bulk of your time and what are those steps, and identify who's responsible, right? I'll say one of the things that we've seen from time and time again is when a very eager security team comes in and they've made the decision to automate a process, but they don't actually own the infrastructure they're going to make they want to make changes on, right? So let's take the example of blocking an IP address at the firewall. These analysts, they can do that, and there's a process, and they put in tickets. But at the end, you usually have someone in the NOC or maybe a similar team, right? That's not part of the security organization that's actually implementing that block. If you don't bring in those stakeholders early on into the process, they're going to feel left behind, and they're going to be reluctant to change. So it would definitely encourage you to bring in that cross-functional team early on as you're beginning the process of identifying the scenarios and use cases for automation in your environment. And then I can't strongly recommend this enough. Once you've gone through this and you've identified this, actually diagram it out. That whiteboard session was fantastic. You need to start formalizing that in some documentation, whether you use Microsoft Visio or like a cloud-based solution like Lucidchart, or even PowerPoint, right? There's some great little simple drawing tools inside of PowerPoint that you all probably have access to. Put it down so that you don't forget what the process is. Some key things you're going to want to capture there, I've listed, right? Making sure that making sure that the decisions at each point in the process where there may be branching paths are well understood and are all pointing towards that target state and process. I would also recommend capturing the amount of time it takes for the steps that your analysts are involved in, right? Whether you're looking at non-touch time and those waiting where something's sitting in a queue, or the actual touch time when an analyst is working on a step. Make sure that you've taken that. you've taken that time to document that and you understand that, right? Because if that's a 30-second thing and they only do it once a day, and I'm going to walk you through calculating this here in a second, that may not be a worthwhile thing to automate in this process, or at least especially if it's going to take you some time to build out an automation for it, because maybe there's some complexity in the environment. Make sure you really understand that time so that you can target the things that are going to add the most values quickly. And then figure out how many times the scenario is going to be carried out on an average day. And the reason why those two last steps are important is calculating that return on investment, understanding what to target. For those of you who are familiar with XKCD, the joke is that there's always a relevant one, and this is no different if you're not familiar. It's comics by Randall Munroe, and I've provided the link to the source material here. It's well worth your time. When you look at this chart here, it helps you calculate how much time you can spend on automating a task before you're spending more time than you would save. And this is a 5-year chart, right? So highlighting a specific here, right? If you do something 5 times a day and you shave off 30 minutes, you could spend 6 months over 5 years figuring out how to automate it and hit break even. And I'm guessing most of you are going to spend far less than 6 months automating a single process before you get that return on investment of the time, before you even start talking about dollars and cents, right? So comics are funny, but every second does count when we're talking about a security incident or a breach. How do we do these things faster? And how do we do it repeatable and reliable every single time, regardless of who's doing it or what shift it is? I think if you've ever experienced this, right? Like sometimes you've got 3 teams, an A, B, and a C team, and really the A team is more like your Z team, just by nature of the resources available on those, right? How do you take the best things out of your organization and make them shared across knowledge, right? So you do that, combine that with automation, you not only are saving time, but you're getting better at the same time. It's really, I think, one of the most exciting things about SOAR Technologies is really up-leveling all of the staff at the same time that you're saving time. Like most of the time, hey, we can make everybody great if we do these this very long, arduous process, but it's not like that in this case. So it's pretty exciting. And I want to talk about what to automate and what not to automate. Many people, when they first are introduced to the concept of orchestration or automation inside of their security teams or their IT operations team, they immediately go to this end-to-end process and they think, oh, I'm going to do all this really cool stuff. Like, hey, I'm going to hunt for all my adversaries. I'm going to just do all these whiz bang things, right? I'm literally doing these really cool, exciting things. And those are the things that the analysts are actually love to do. And so they focus on, how can I automate this this threat hunting in my network? You can, and maybe you should, but don't go there first. Think about the boring stuff. Think about the boring stuff that you're doing manually and see, hey, how can I retain my people? How can I save time, save money, and target those first? Boring is exciting when you can stop doing it manually. I think it's such a true statement. I mean, just think about the things in your personal life. Vacuuming. Who here's bought a Roomba or another autonomous vacuum, right? Because who wants to vacuum? What about mowing the yard? Kids, landscaping company, robots, driving our cars, right? Driving in traffic. I mean, not that we're having a ton of traffic right now, but I love my adaptive cruise control, right? It's not that I don't like driving. It's that I don't like driving in traffic. So I'm taking some of the stop and starting out of it and letting a robot do it, right? So when you take all that and put it against the time that you spend in your work week, where can you get some time back that's boring for you or your teams and spend on something that's adding value to the mission of the organization you work for? And then just think about how your calendar would look when you have some of that white space on it. Some last nickels and dimes before we move into the Q&A section of our time today. Some things I think that are important for folks to know, especially inside of our defense sector. Not everyone's a developer. I think you'll see in the news and the press that, hey, everybody's going to be a developer by 2025 or some crazy thing like that. And I don't think that personally, I don't think that's true. I think that we need to harness the strengths of each individual, and not everyone is going to do the same job at the end of the time, right? And so things like a visual development environment, or we call ours the visual playbook editor, right? Those things make it easy for non-programmers to create those playbooks as well as edit them and make changes, right? And one of the key things there is that reduces that development time, right? Rather than having to like look at a bunch of code and write all this code, right? You drag and drop elements onto this, and it does all of that for you. So it improves that first time quality of the code, reduces errors, but also creates that standard framework for how it all works. And then one of the things that Splunk Phantom does is we also encourage our playbooks, and when they're being developed, to be self-documenting, right? So we've got a lot of great options in there to explain the process end to end within the software, so that the next time somebody has to go edit or make updates or do some iterative development here, they already know what's going on, especially when it's not going to be the same person 6 months as it was 6 months prior. Also, want to highlight that then I think the recommendation to combine automation and orchestration with end-to-end process standardization, right? So in my case, one of the things that stands out to me is, as the Security Operations Center manager, I had a specific incident response, CJCSM 6510 requirements that I had to follow. A lot of those things involved not security things. I had to go make phone calls. I had to go write case reports. I had to make sure that my teams are doing all of these things that almost didn't at all feel or smell like anything cyber, right? Sit reps are not cyber. Sit reps are a report to leadership about the situation, right? It is not, there's cyber elements to it, but those things aren't natively cyber. So when you take these concepts of automation orchestration and then layer on top of response templates, or we call them workbooks, when you combine these with automation, you're doing kind of an end-to-end process here, where you have your automation routines that follow through this overarching business process or mission process that has manual steps in it. And so like in Phantom, we've got the capability to develop these response templates and workbooks that you have, hey, step one is call the ISSM, right? You can mark that done in there, so that that the person responding and opens up this case for the first time knows that that's step one, versus having to pull out and have a binder next to them. Not that the binder is a bad thing, but how about you make sure that you do that? And then as you're going through that process and inside of Phantom, you're checking that box and you say, at this time I did that, right? So you're self-documenting that process for auditability and making sure that every analyst is following the same process. I think that's really compelling. And then I think one of the biggest pitfalls that an organization can find themselves in when they do start down this automation journey is trying to do too much and then never change it again. I think that's the quintessential waterfall project management methodology versus something like Agile, right? So start small, iterate frequently. Your app dev teams, right? Your software factories, they absolutely know this intrinsically. Do your security operations teams know that as well? Do they know it's safe to do something and then iterate over time? And if you're a leader, allow your people the freedom to do that. Encourage them, because when they're doing this, they're going to get better. They're going to get better faster, and you're going to end up with a better result. So, and that is about all I want to talk. I was hoping, and I'm looking forward to some questions. Do we have any questions? I don't have it up on my screen.
Drew, I don't have any in the queue, but a reminder to all those on the line, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box. We'll hold off for a couple minutes for anybody who would like to ask them in the box. Drew, feel free to add anything else while we wait for a couple of questions to come through.
One thing that does come to mind as I kind of wrapped up, as I was talking, I don't think people know that automation technologies are really nothing new inside of the IT security space. When you start thinking about technologies like Ansible, Puppet, Chef in your Unix environments, or even going back to business process automation tools that help data entry, or I, for a short period of time, was managing a system center orchestrator deployment where I was able to orchestrate, this was almost a decade ago at this point, able to orchestrate a bunch of things happening on a Windows platform, right? And so as you go down that journey and you're looking into doing that for security, find those people in your organization that are really passionate about that. Maybe they've never touched a formal piece of technology that automates something, but maybe they're the scripter. Maybe they're the person who's really good at a whiteboard session. Maybe they're the person that facilitates the best meeting you've ever seen. Pull in all of those resources and start there, right? Get some good ideas flowing. And then when you have those people assembled, go solicit feedback, both at the top of the chain, at the bottom of the chain. And you'll frequently, if you look at that feedback and say, hey, what should we look at automating? What should we look at doing and adding value to the organization? You'll find that if you perform some kind of affinitization exercise, what the commander or other senior leadership in the organization want as outcomes are frequently, you can go look and see and have the staff or the deck plate leadership and the workers have all identified the pain, right? So you just match those two things up together and you can satisfy the needs and desires of your leadership and solve the pain points again. So that common inflection of where to target those things. Sometimes you're not always going to hit it out of the mark, and maybe the commander's going to want something different than what the workers want, but frequently, and I've seen time and time and time again, that they're one and the same. So I think that would definitely be something to do. Don't be afraid. This is going on in your organization in pockets. Grab a hold of it and take what they've learned and do that for your security organization.
Thank you, Drew. I don't have any questions in the queue. I did have a comment though. Great information. Thank you for sharing. Again, if anybody has any questions that come up a little bit later, you can definitely email us and we will respond with an answer from Drew. Again, thanks Drew for presenting and everybody as well as attending. We will post the recording to the Alamo AFCEA website within the next few days. So keep an eye out for that. Everybody have a great day. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Drew.